Hi everyone, Megan here. Today I'm going to be doing what is most likely my last installment of my Journey to Jane Austen series. Now if you've watched my other videos, you know that I was planning to go to England this summer. That didn't happen because of COVID-19, of course, but I'm still rereading all of Jane Austen's novels like I planned to do. So as my last reread, I read The Watsons and Sanditon. Now, Lady Susan is also part of this book. I've read that a few times as well. I decided not to reread Lady Susan this time just because it's not my favorite. I know a lot of people love Lady Susan. It's just not really my thing, so I just stuck with The Watsons and Sanditon. Now, I'm just gonna put this here. There we go. Yes, so if you haven't heard of The Watsons and Sanditon, the reason is that they are not full novels. They are just fragments. That's their official term. They're fragments of novels. Now The Watsons was written first in the early, around 1805, I think. She was living in Bath with her father, her mother, and her sister. Because of her father's ill health and because of finances, they moved to Bath. So there she worked on The Watsons. Now it's not totally clear why she stopped writing The Watsons, but it's most likely because her father died, and in the story her plan was that the father would die. So maybe she thought it was too close to home and decided to stop writing it. So The Watsons is the story of Emma Watson. I know, right? I think Emma Watson should play Emma Watson in a film version. I would love to see that. So yes, The Watsons is the story of Emma Watson, a young woman who has been raised by her aunt from when she was 5 years old to the present time when she's 19 years old. She was raised by her aunt in hopes that her aunt would, make her heir. That didn't end up happening because her aunt met and married an Irish captain, and unfortunately Emma was sent home to her father and her three sisters, Penelope, Margaret, and what's the other one? Elizabeth. She also has a couple brothers who are married, one who's unmarried, one who is married, who figure into the story, and I was loving these family dynamics in this fragment. It's only about 50 pages long, but I was loving it. Her father is this sweet, sickly man who she kind of, when she goes and takes care of him, it's like a refuge from being with her sisters, because Elizabeth is quite clueless and delusional in a way. She's very chatty and she's not very self-aware. She's kind of unhinged a bit. So while Emma doesn't mind being with her, it's not exactly restful. Their sister Margaret is she's irritating and also irritable and not very kind at all, and also pretty delusional. At this point, we haven't met Penelope yet. The other sister, she's away, but she was going to be coming home soon. We have met one of her brothers and his wife, who also do not seem like nice people. Now, I love it when there is a ball in Jane Austen. I just love reading about the balls. And this book pretty much has a ball right at the beginning. Obviously, within the first 50 pages of what would have been the novel, there is a ball. She meets this novel's bad lad, Tom Musgrave. She also meets a Lord Osborne, who is awkward, confident, very wealthy, interested in her, but not really that great in expressing his feelings. Does that sound similar? Well, yes, he's quite Mr. Darcy-ish. And that made me think, oh no, is she going to end up with this Lord Osborne person? Because I do not really like him. But then I thought, well, I didn't like Mr. Darcy either at the beginning of Pride and Prejudice. But there's also another man in this book named Mr. Howard. He's very kind, very respectful. He is a minister. He's just like a really good guy, And so it's like, as I was reading it, I was like, oh my goodness, I want her to end up with Mr. Howard, not Lord Osborne, the Mr. Darcy character. So what I'm going to do is, there is a little part at the end of this book. Let's see, where is it? It's just a note, and it says it's from the second edition of the memoir, so the memoir that James Edward Austen Lee wrote. James Edward Austen Lee is Jane Austen's nephew. So from that edition, he added this little note. So if you don't want spoilers for what the Watsons would have been, I'll put somewhere on the screen the time to when to skip to. So yeah, just go to that time if you don't want to hear what apparently would have happened in this novel if Jane Austen had finished it. So it says, when the author's sister, Cassandra, showed the manuscript of this work to some of her nieces, she also told them something of the intended story. For with this dear sister, though I believe with no one else, Jane seems to have taken wow, I can't talk right now. Jane seems to have talked freely of any work she might have had in hand. Mr. Watson was soon to die, so that's maybe why she stopped writing it. And Emma to become dependent for a home on her narrow-minded sister-in-law and brother. She was to decline an offer of marriage from Lord Osborne, so the Mr. Darcy character was going to propose to her. And much of the interest of the tale was to arise from Lady Osborne, that is Lord Osborne's mother, from Lady Osborne's love for Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard is the really cool minister guy. And his counter-affection for Emma, whom he was finally to marry. So she is going to end up with Mr. Howard, not the Mr. Darcy character, which I'm very happy about. And I think it's good that it's different from Pride and Prejudice. And you know what? I love The Watsons. I mean, I've loved it all 3 times that I've read it. And I'm like, Jane Austen, I wish you could have finished it, because it would have just been so cool to read that. But at the same time, I think Kate Howe and I were talking about this, and she said, you know, sometimes an author knows when they can't do a story justice, or when things just aren't going well, so then, you know, they know when they need to stop, and it's like, yeah, that's true too. And maybe it's better to have this wonderful fragment than to have a novel that's not that good. Another thing that I would have been doing on my trip to England is seeing a stage version of The Watsons in London. Oh, I wanted to see it so bad. So hopefully they will have it playing whenever I do get to go to England, because I would just love to see what a modern writer does with The Watsons. Speaking of what a modern writer does with a fragment of Jane Austen, we'll start talking about Sanditon now. And I am going to talk a little bit about the TV series, but don't worry, I'll give any spoiler warnings, all that. So this was my first time rereading Sanditon after watching the mini-series. And so it was really interesting, because this time around I had this very particular idea of what all the characters looked like, and I could very clearly distinguish which character was which character, whereas, whoop! When I read it the first 2 times, I couldn't really distinguish all the characters super clearly, because it's only the first 12 chapters of Sanditon, which means that it's only about 50 to 70 pages long. And you know, whenever that beginning chunk of a Jane Austen novel happens, there's always lots of, maybe I shouldn't put that there anymore. There's always lots of, well, now where was I? Oh yeah, whenever you're reading the beginning of a Jane Austen novel, there are a lot of characters being introduced, and throughout the course of the novel, that's how you get to know them, and fine, that's just gonna have to go there. Yeah, so there's tons of characters that are being introduced, so you kind of, after you get into the novel, you get to know who the characters are. They all become very distinct, whereas we don't get a chance with that in Sanditon. So it was really neat to watch it this time around and have that distinct, you know, what they look like in my head, like who is who, how they're all related, how they're all separated. Like, it just really made the experience even that more enjoyable for me, and also to be like, what was Andrew Davies thinking? So Andrew Davies wrote the mini-series of Sanditon. So this was the last novel that Jane Austen was working on. Now, the reason why she didn't finish it is because she became very ill near the end of her life, most likely with Addison's disease, although it's not confirmed what she had. But eventually she became too ill to write, and she had to put the pen down, and then a couple months later she did end up dying. So that's why Sanditon is not finished. So Sanditon is the story of Charlotte Haywood, one of 14 children in the Haywood family. By chance, she meets Tom and Mary Parker. There's a carriage accident. She meets them. She helps them out. Her family helps them out. And they take her to Sanditon, a city nearby that Tom Parker is working on turning into a seaside resort. Now, while she's there, she meets characters such as Lady Denham, the local Lady Catherine de Bourgh character, very rich, outspoken, older woman. And she also meets, very briefly at the end of the novel, or the end of the fragment, like within the last 2 pages, she meets Sidney Parker, who they don't even, like, Jane Austen doesn't even give him any dialogue. We just hear that they have a friendly conversation very briefly with Mary Parker, who they happen to run into. Or Mary Parker and Charlotte run into Sidney. We also meet Edward and Esther Denham, relations of Lady Denham who are after her money. We also meet Clara Brereton, who is a poor relation of Lady Denham and who is living with her. We also, there's a passing mention of old Stringer and his son. And if you watch the miniseries, you know that young Stringer plays a very important role. Now, one thing that is the most interesting, I think, about Sanditon is that we meet Jane Austen's first person of color that she ever wrote about. So there was going to be a person of color in Sanditon, and so that's even sadder that she didn't finish it. Her name is Miss Lamb. I don't know if they give her a last name. I can't remember if she has a first name in the book, but in the miniseries she's Georgiana Lamb. So Miss Lamb is a very wealthy heiress, but we don't really hear too much more about her except that she's going to come and visit Sanditon. So really we hardly get any information about her, but her storyline in the miniseries of Sanditon was one of my favorite parts of it. So now I'm going to be talking about the character in the book versus how that character is done in the miniseries. So I'm not going to really give too many spoilers for the miniseries, but I might, if you don't want to know anything about the miniseries in advance, then I would say stop watching. But if you don't care, then you might find this really interesting. So you have been warned. Now the thing about the miniseries is that it is not at all, I don't think at all, what Jane Austen would have written. So a lot of people haven't watched it. A lot of people who have watched it have hated it, but there are a lot of people who have loved it. I don't love it or hate it. I love aspects of it, but I really don't like other aspects of it. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about how the characters were in the book versus how they were portrayed in the miniseries. I don't have too much to say about our heroine, Charlotte Haywood. In the book, she's 22. In the miniseries, she seems like she's a bit younger than that, and yet it's probably just that she's a bit more naive, but yet she's smart. She hasn't been out much in the world, which maybe makes her seem younger. So I thought Rose Williams, I believe, was the actress. I thought she did a great job of Charlotte. Now, Georgiana, I love her character, Georgiana Lamb, Miss Lamb. So yes, as I said, in the book, she's barely mentioned, just her name is mentioned. She doesn't even appear yet, but she was one of my favorite parts of the book, of the miniseries. So Georgiana, her father was a slave owner in Antigua, and her mother was a slave. So she, of course, that would be such a difficult position to be in because you don't really belong anywhere. So she has been taken over to England, her father died, and her father was she needs to go to England to get an education and all that stuff. So here she is, and she is treated quite terribly by Lady Denham, and seeing her strength of character and her vivacity and her feistiness, I just love her character so much. And it was really interesting to bring in issues of race into the miniseries because you don't really get that in Jane Austen's books. I mean, there is mention of the slave trade in Mansfield Park, but it's not super overt. So it would have been cool to see what Jane Austen would have done in the book, but I do like how that is explored in the miniseries. So Edward in the miniseries is a total sleazeball. He's gross. He's out to seduce every woman ever. He's very lecherous. Whereas in the book, he is he's almost inexperienced in a way. He's inexperienced of life, where he uses all these words of poetry, and he's talking so poetically all the time and being so over the top in his language that Charlotte says she thinks that he is almost silly. She almost laughs at him. Whereas I don't think you would get that. In the miniseries, Charlotte seems creeped out by Edward, whereas she almost laughs at Edward in the book. So that's a very different power dynamic, where it seems like Edward has this power, this creepy power, whereas in the book, he's just silly and doesn't have that power. So I would have liked to see if they had stuck closer to the book with Edward's character. On the other hand, in the book, Edward's goal is to seduce Clara Brereton. And those are the words that Jane Austen uses. He wants to seduce her. And I don't think Jane Austen has ever, that seems the most sexual that Jane Austen has ever gotten. So I can see where Andrew Davies was oh, this one's more sexual, so we're just gonna make that all about what the miniseries is about. So I think he went way too far with that, but what can you do? In the book, Clara is a sweet, poor girl, poor relation, who's very sweet, respectful, and submissive. In the miniseries, she has all the appearance of all those things I just said, but she's actually conniving, manipulative, and controlling, and very ambitious. So, but the thing is, at the beginning of the series, you think that Clara is the Clara of the book, and then she reveals her true colors. So maybe, who knows, maybe Jane Austen was going to reveal Clara as this, you know, crazy, conniving, manipulative person. I don't know. Sydney is the hero in the miniseries, and maybe he was going to be the hero in the book. I don't know. We only get one brief scene with Sydney in the fragment, and he's kind, he's nice, he's gregarious, he's social, he's outgoing. In like the brief like minute conversation he has with Mary Parker, his sister-in-law, and Charlotte. And that's what all his siblings are like. They're all like that. Whereas in the miniseries, his siblings are like that, but he is this brooding, grumpy, you know, like broken, damaged man. And I really do not like Sydney. I know Theo James plays him, so a lot of girls are like, oh, Sydney, I just love him, oh my goodness. And yeah, sure, he's a handsome man, but Sydney is a terrible character. He like yells at Charlotte. He's so rude to her. Like, he's mean. He might have been involved in the slave trade. Like, he is just, I do not like Sydney at all. Like, he has not redeemed himself, in my opinion. I'm like, why on earth would Charlotte ever be interested in Sydney? I do not understand it, especially when young Stringer is in the picture, which leads me to talk about young Stringer. He is, as I said, he's barely mentioned in the book. Like, he isn't mentioned in the book. It's old Stringer and his son. They don't even mention young Stringer. So when I was watching the miniseries, I was like, who is this young Stringer? Like, I do not remember him from the book. And then, so when I went into Sanditon, I was like, the book, when I was going to read it this time, I was like, I am going to look to see if there is a character called young Stringer. And there is a character called old Stringer and his son. Which is funny because in the miniseries, my two favorite parts were Georgiana Lamb and young Stringer. And young Stringer, both, like, they're not even in the book hardly at all. So I really did enjoy those parts of the miniseries. So yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about with the Watsons and Sanditon. Would I recommend the miniseries? Yeah, I guess. There's some like stuff, and I have heard that the version that was released in North America is slightly different from the version in Britain. Some of the things, there was some nudity, as well as a painting that Georgiana was working on apparently was explicit. So those things were not released in North America. And then there's some other things in Sanditon, like, that I really didn't appreciate, like, just overtly, weirdly sexual, that I did not appreciate. Yeah, would I recommend it? I guess I would recommend the parts with the parts with Charlotte, Sydney, young Stringer, Georgiana Lamb, and the Parkers. I would recommend those parts. Would I recommend the parts with Esther and Clara and Edward? No. Yeah, so I enjoyed rereading these again. It was so much fun. I don't think I'll have any more videos in this series, but I mean, there's a lot of great Jane Austen related nonfiction and fiction that I want to read more of, and I will be reading Jane Austen's letters whenever that book arrives. So yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about for now, and let me know if you have read The Watsons or Sanditon, or if you saw the mini-series and what you thought of it, or if you want to read them, let me know about that. So yeah, I hope you're all doing really well, and may you all be filled with peace, hope, love, and joy. So take care, everyone. Bye.